Tonight we begin with a military escalation that Pentagon officials had feared, intelligence analysts had tracked, and senior military commanders had prepared contingency plans to counter. A development that unfolded not over weeks of diplomatic channels, but in a matter of hours across 3 continents. Hours that saw ballistic missiles tested, hours that saw air defense systems repositioned, hours that saw Washington and Tel Aviv move in coordinated military precision. What Iran did today crossed a line that even the most hawkish voices in Washington had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, the Netanyahu administration did not hesitate. They responded with overwhelming force, strategic precision, and a message that was unmistakable to every capital in the Middle East. For the past 72 hours now, there had been signals, not from official intelligence briefings, not from formal diplomatic channels, just signals that Tehran was preparing something unprecedented in scale. Iran has been aggressive, yes, but they have been calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a predictable cadence. But what set off alarm bells in the Pentagon this morning was that the pattern went completely silent. Defense Intelligence Agency analysts who monitor Iranian military activity know the indicators. The radio chatter on certain frequencies, the mobilization of command structures across the Revolutionary Guard, the movement of mobile launcher units toward strategic positions, the sudden cessation of all routine communications, all of that went quiet at 0300 hours Tehran time. And whenever Iran goes quiet, military planners understand one iron rule. Something is about to get loud. By 0600 hours, satellite imagery confirmed it. By 0800 hours, the Pentagon had briefed the president. By 1200 hours, coordinated strikes were already in motion. This wasn't a gradual escalation. This was something different entirely. Early this morning, Pentagon sources detected what they described as a full mobilization of Iran's long-range ballistic missile arsenal, including technical preparations that had not been observed in over 18 months. These are the kinds of weapons systems that Iran only readies when they are signaling something very specific, an imminent strike, a final test before deployment, or a demonstration meant to provoke a reaction they believe they can manage. Intelligence officers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Iran was changing its military posture fundamentally. And when a state actor shifts its strategic posture without explanation, even by the smallest measure, the National Security Council pays immediate attention. By mid-morning, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had convened an emergency situation room meeting. By early afternoon, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had personally authorized what officials are now calling enhanced defensive measures. The language was bureaucratic. The reality was unmistakable. Within hours, strike aircraft were being positioned, naval assets were being repositioned, and direct communication lines between Washington and Tel Aviv were burning with activity. The assessment issued by the Pentagon tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Military officials, after classified briefings, described Iran's mobilization as unprecedented in its scope, accelerated beyond previous timelines. And perhaps most importantly, coordinated in a way that suggested external actors were involved, but deterrence only works if the target hesitates. Israel did not. In fact, their response tonight was among the most comprehensive military operations we've seen in the Middle East in over 5 years. Here's what we know. Within 4 hours of Iran's final preparations, Israeli strike aircraft launched coordinated attacks across Iranian territory. These weren't routine precision strikes against isolated targets. These were integrated warfare operations, involving air superiority fighters, electronic warfare platforms, and logistics infrastructure that Israel only deploys when they are preparing for sustained military operations. Pentagon officials described the operations as surgical in nature but comprehensive in scope. Translation: Israel knew exactly what it was targeting and why. Tonight, multiple sources confirmed that Israeli forces launched precision strikes on Iranian military installations, including command and control centers that had recently been relocated for what analysts believe was operational security ahead of a planned action. Israel struck before Iran could operationalize its capability. They hit the Parchin military complex in central Iran. They hit the Semnan air base northeast of Tehran. They hit supporting logistics infrastructure that was likely preparing to support larger operations. In other words, Israel targeted the entire operational chain, not just the missiles, not just the launch facilities, the command structure that would have coordinated everything. This is what made the Pentagon's warning so urgent this morning. Iran's mobilization wasn't just symbolic posturing, it was actionable preparation. It represented the kind of move that could have triggered a regional war if left unchecked. And Israel, understanding that fully, responded with overwhelming military force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically and with the explicit understanding that the window for preventive action was closing rapidly. They didn't strike civilian targets. They didn't hit population centers. They hit hardened military installations. They hit command infrastructure. One Israeli Air Force officer, speaking anonymously to journalists, put it plainly: "We had perhaps 6 hours to act. We acted in 5. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Intelligence sources now believe that Iran's latest mobilization was designed to test the credibility of Israeli deterrence after the perceived hesitation in previous responses. Iran wanted to see whether Israel would tolerate an expanded Iranian missile program without military response. But instead, the exact opposite happened. Israel didn't tolerate it. They responded with military operations so decisive, so comprehensive, that even Iran's military command structure was caught unprepared. You don't get Iran's attention easily. But tonight, Israel did. Military analysts speaking with Defense News under condition of anonymity described Iran's strategic shift as miscalculation, a way to test new boundaries without accepting the consequences. But Israel proved tonight that they remain both militarily dominant and strategically alert. Their operations were not only militarily sophisticated, they were calibrated so precisely that they achieved maximum strategic effect while limiting uncontended escalation. That precision matters because it demonstrates two things. First, that Israel maintains real-time intelligence on Iranian military operations. Second, that Israel is not acting unilaterally, but in coordination with intelligence partners who are feeding critical information into their targeting decisions. That second point matters because it shows something we haven't seen in months: genuine intelligence cooperation between Washington and Tel Aviv. It shows that the Netanyahu administration is not acting independently. They are acting in concert with American intelligence agencies. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Israel's response. The Israeli Air Force conducted over 75 separate strike sorties, forcing the temporary closure of multiple Iranian air bases. Coordination with allied intelligence services target Iranian air defense systems that had been recently upgraded with Russian technical assistance. Electronic warfare operations reportedly disabled Iranian communications networks used by the Revolutionary Guard to coordinate the mobilization. This wasn't just a limited retaliatory strike. This wasn't just symbolic military action. This was comprehensive military interdiction. This was a demonstration of overwhelming Israeli capability. An overwhelming capability is the one thing Iran has struggled to maintain since the 2015 nuclear agreement collapsed. For every advance in their missile programs, Israel has countered with operational intelligence and technological superiority that has consistently outpaced Iranian development. Tonight was no exception. In fact, Pentagon officials say it represents a new threshold in Israeli military capability that should concern not just Iran, but every regional actor. Remember, Iran believed several things going into this week. They believed that American political divisions would prevent a unified response. They believed that international pressure would constrain Israeli military options. They believed that their missile programs had advanced beyond Israeli ability to effectively counter them. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. American institutions moved in lockstep coordination with Israeli military planners. International pressure evaporated the moment missiles were detected, and Israeli military capability proved not just sufficient, but overwhelming against Iranian preparations. Every assumption Iran operated under proved incorrect. What makes this moment so extraordinarily significant and so extraordinarily dangerous is that Iran's latest mobilization happened at a time when their leadership is under enormous internal pressure. Conservative hardliners want direct military confrontation with the West. Pragmatists want to preserve the nuclear deal and normalize relations. Economic ministers want sanctions relief and trade normalization. Military commanders want resources and autonomy for strategic programs. Iran's supreme leadership is balancing these demands while managing economic collapse and popular dissatisfaction. And when leaders in that position make sudden military moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from desperation. Tonight's Israeli response just intensified that pressure exponentially. The Pentagon's formal assessment, now released to congressional leadership, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to tolerate Iranian expansion of its ballistic missile capability. Senior officials said plainly that Iran's mobilization was inconsistent with their stated commitment to regional de-escalation. That is extremely careful diplomatic language for, "We just watched you prepare for military action, and we're not going to tolerate it." You don't usually hear that tone from Pentagon officials unless something existential is at stake. Secretary Austin's statement, released at 1,400 hours, was even more direct. The United States will not tolerate Iranian aggression. We will work with our allies to ensure regional stability. Working with allies. Israel's allies. Tel Aviv specifically. That's not veiled language. That's explicit coordination. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed the Israeli public in a nationally televised speech tonight. He was direct. He was forceful. He was unapologetic. He said, "We have demonstrated to our enemies that we will protect our people. We will not wait for threats to materialize. We will act." He said, "Iran has spent 40 years developing weapons of war. Today, we have shown them that those weapons will not protect them. They will not give them power." And he said, "Israel is strong. Israel is prepared. And Israel will not hesitate." These are not rhetorical flourishes from a political leader playing to his base. These are statements from a prime minister that understands just how high the stakes have become, and they're statements that were explicitly approved by the Trump transition team before being delivered. Here's what makes the situation even more alarming. Iran's latest mobilization wasn't isolated to missile programs. Along with the ballistic missile preparations, Hezbollah and Lebanon also increased rocket production and forward deployment targeting Israeli border communities. Iraqi militia groups coordinated with Iranian handlers to position drone swarms closer to American military positions in Iraq and Syria. Houthi forces in Yemen repositioned naval assets in the Red Sea, presumably preparing for operations against commercial shipping and military vessels. All of this happened within the same 72-hour window. When Iran moves multiple military pieces simultaneously, it means something larger was being orchestrated. Intelligence analysts believe Iran was testing whether a coordinated regional response could overwhelm Israeli and American defenses. The answer, delivered today, was unequivocal: no. Intelligence officials are now considering several possibilities about what Iran intended. One possibility is that Iran was preparing a first-strike ballistic missile attack on Israeli targets, designed to overwhelm air defenses with volume and saturation. Another possibility is that Iran was attempting to establish an operational capability that could be deployed if nuclear negotiations broke down. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Iran was attempting to demonstrate capability in a way that would constrain American military options and embolden its regional proxies. But tonight, Israel took that strategic card completely off the table. They didn't respond with warning shots. They didn't respond with diplomatic pressure. They didn't respond with economic sanctions. They responded with comprehensive military operations that crippled Iranian command and control infrastructure. What we're watching now is a test of strategic will. Iran wants to see whether the Netanyahu government will sustain military operations under international pressure. Israel wants to demonstrate that it will act decisively regardless of international opinion. The Biden administration wants to show that American military power still matters in the Middle East. And the Trump transition team wants to position itself as capable of managing this crisis after taking office. All four actors are testing each other. All four are signaling their resolve. And all four know that the next 72 hours will determine whether this becomes a contained military engagement or the opening phase of a larger regional conflict. Tonight, we've heard from multiple intelligence sources who are now monitoring Iranian response preparations. They say initial damage assessments suggest that Israeli strikes destroyed or severely damaged at least 12 major Iranian military facilities. They say Iranian air defenses, despite recent Russian upgrades, proved insufficient against Israeli electronic warfare capabilities. And intelligence officials believe Iran's decision to mobilize is likely part of a broader strategy intended to demonstrate capability to its regional allies and deter further Israeli military action. But Israel is not backing down. In fact, Israeli military planners are reportedly preparing contingency plans for additional operations if Iran attempts to reconstitute its damaged facilities. Their response today, precise, comprehensive, and devastating in its effectiveness, sent a clear message to Iran that unilateral military action will result in asymmetric response. And it sent a message to the Trump administration that Netanyahu is prepared to act independently if he believes Israeli security demands it. As the next 48 hours unfold, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Iran hoped to achieve with its mobilization. But what we do know is that Israel's response was timely. It prevented Iran from operationalizing a capability that would have transformed the strategic balance. It demonstrated that Israeli military superiority is not theoretical, but actual and overwhelming. And it established that the Netanyahu government is willing to accept international criticism in exchange for what they believe is necessary military action. What happens next will depend entirely on what Iran does in the next 72 hours. If they attempt to reconstitute their damaged facilities, Israeli strike aircraft are already positioned to prevent it. If they attempt to retaliate through proxy forces, the Pentagon has made clear that American military assets will defend Israeli interests. And if they attempt diplomatic resolution, both Tel Aviv and Washington have shown they will negotiate from a position of demonstrated military strength. Israel and America have shown they are ready. They have shown they are prepared. They have shown they are willing to act. And tonight, for the first time in 6 months, Tehran appears to be on its heels. The capital is quiet, too quiet. And when Iran is quiet, it means its leadership is reassessing. It means they are choosing their next moves with extreme caution. Because tonight, Iran learned something they have learned many times before, but apparently forgot again. That Israeli military capability is not theoretical, but devastating. That American commitment to regional security is not ambiguous, but explicit. And that the consequences of miscalculation are immediate and overwhelming. This crisis is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The Netanyahu-Trump axis just demonstrated that it will not tolerate Iranian expansion unchallenged. The region just witnessed what happens when Iran tests that boundary. And every capital from Baghdad to Beijing just received a stark reminder about the balance of military power in the Middle East. And we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase of this crisis unfolds.